such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a solved one about a victim who identified their attacker and then recanted when they survived. No one thought a survivor would be found at a crime scene that looked like this, yet she could answer questions that left everyone speechless. The problem was proving this person with a seemingly good alibi was guilty, especially when the survivor then claimed they were actually innocent. By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you're subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. I also want to say thank you so incredibly much for 100,000 gems. 100,000 of you guys. I cannot even fathom that many people, and to me it's never been about the numbers. To me it's about the sheer amount of people who care about these cases and like the way that I present them and feel like I do it respectfully, and that's what matters the most to me. And so the fact that we are growing and you guys support me and support these victims and want to hear such horrific stories just to give the victims light, it truly means everything to me. And I just want to let you guys know that there's so many exciting things that I have planned for us, for this channel, for things branching out from this channel, and I always have you guys at the forefront of my mind when I'm doing anything, and I care about what you guys want and how you guys will react to it and if it will make you happy more than anything. And I just want you to know that it doesn't just seem like a number to me, and it's not like I am striving for the next big number. It's that every single one of you I'm so incredibly grateful for, and I hope you know that, and I hope you know that I love you watching right now. And yeah, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. So now let's get back to the story. So it was 2004 in New York, and the Porco family lived in a place called Delmar. This was Peter, a 52-year-old lawyer, and his wife Joan, who was a children's speech pathologist. And together they were husband and wife. They had actually had 2 sons together, and they lived at a 2-story home on 36 Broccoli Drive, but they were currently living just the 2 of them. You see, they had been together for 30 years, and their sons were now grown. They had an oldest who was 23-year-old Jonathan, who was currently in the U.S. Navy, and the youngest, who is 21-year-old Christopher, who was actually at college at the time, attending University of Rochester. With their boys being 13 hours away and 3 hours away, they really were getting used to the fact that they had an empty nest. However, they still really did enjoy when their boys came home to visit them, and they would often look forward to that. But other than that, this couple lived a quiet, peaceful life together, and the only drama that ever surrounded this family had actually happened years prior, and it wasn't anything too crazy. You see, their home had actually been robbed of the normal, electronics like laptops and cameras, and this occurred a few times, but no one had ever been caught for doing so. But it was said that no one personally had a problem with this family, and a lot of people knew them. Peter and Joan were said to be the most generous, kind people, and family meant everything to them. Their friends and family and even their coworkers cared so deeply about their well-being and just making sure that they were living a happy life and that they were, mentally doing okay as well. And that's why on November 15th, Peter was almost immediately reported missing. A court officer was almost immediately sent to his home when he didn't show up to work that morning, and this was just a welfare check, and everyone knew that if he wasn't going to be coming to work on time, that something was very wrong. He never did this. However, they would have never predicted what they would find. You see, the door did not have a broken lock. It wasn't open, but there was a key in the door that appeared to be like a spare key. And so this court officer turned the knob and went inside, only to find Peter right inside the door. He was lying on the ground in a pool of blood with severe head trauma, and the court officer immediately called the local police, and upon getting to this scene and inspecting it, they found that there was actually a trail of blood leaving from his body, as though he had gotten up and been walking around. This would lead from the front door to the kitchen, to the hallway, to the bathroom, and all the way up the stairs to a bedroom. His body would not be the only body that they would be finding that day. The upstairs bedroom was covered in blood, and there was a body lying on the bed. Upon closer inspection, they found it to be Joan, Peter's wife, and a portion of her brain was exposed. Her face was unrecognizable. However, she was looking back at them, alive. Joan's left eye was missing, her jaw was crushed, and her teeth were gone, but she was still fighting for life. She even gestured for the detectives to come over, and that is when Detective Christopher Bowdish couldn't believe his eyes, and he knew what he had to do next. Before paramedics could take her away, he wanted to have a chance to talk to her because he didn't know if she would be alive to talk to her after they got her to the hospital. While in a horrific, painful state that was hard to even look at, Joan began to answer questions in the only way she could. Not through speaking, but through nodding. And the detective asked Joan if she could hear him, and she nodded yes. Over the next few minutes, he would ask her even more questions, and what she would answer next would make this case one of the largest they had ever handled in the office, with mountains of evidence and materials that they gathered. The house alarm system actually was connected to the wall and was smashed in, and the telephone lines were cut to their home, meaning if they had even tried to call for help, if they could have possibly made it that far, no help would have arrived. A point of entry was also found to possibly be one of the slashed windows. Now, this was actually the slash screen that somebody could have gotten through, yet one motive that was thought to be almost immediately what everybody looked at was robbery. And this is because, of course, the family had been robbed a few times prior. This time, however, nothing was stolen. There was wallets, cash, jewelry, electronics that were all still there in plain sight. Now, what was thought to be the murder weapon was also found in the parents' bedroom. This was a fireman's axe that belonged to them. The autopsy of Peter Porco came back to show that he had been struck with that axe 16 times in the head, and this ultimately removed his entire jaw. However, just like Joan, he hadn't died immediately. There was also a trail of blood that we had first talked about that the detectives found. But he hadn't just gone from the bedroom to the door like we said. He went all through the house. They believed that Peter had basically been on the brink of death and in such shock that he didn't realize that anything had happened, and he began to do his morning routine. You see, they believed he had woken up to get ready for the day. He had gone from the bedroom to the bathroom to use the toilet where there was blood, and then to go over to the sink to shave. There was more blood there. And then he went downstairs to start his coffee in the kitchen, and then he made his lunch and began to load the dishwasher. This is things that he always did on autopilot. Then what was next on his routine was to check if the newspaper had arrived. So he stepped outside the door, and with a few drops of blood found right outside, this is what they believed he did before coming back inside and collapsing right in front of the door. He never made it to work that morning like he usually did, and he most likely was said to have no idea what he was doing, or that he had been attacked so brutally that it was a miracle he was even moving about. But Joan, on the other hand, had been rushed to the hospital. She was taken into surgery, and she actually survived and was in a coma. Detectives still had her statement that she had made at the home, but they now needed to inform her family that not only was her husband deceased, but she was in a coma and had survived this horrible attack. But this is something they hadn't gotten to yet, and unfortunately, the media got to the family first. This was every detective's fear that a victim's family, will find out with the rest of the public rather than from them. But, you see, Peter and Joan's youngest son, Christopher, would call the police department that same day. And he was asking for more information because a newspaper reporter had called to ask him about his statement about the attack and murder of his parents. He said that he was in shock and disbelief, and this is how that phone call went.
Hi, my name is Joan Porco. I was just called by the Times-Union saying that my parents were found dead this afternoon. I was wondering if you had any information for me.
Hey, Chris, whereabouts are you?
I'm at school in Rochester, New York.
Okay, you're in Rochester?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a phone number there, Chris?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay, and are you in a dorm there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And you're hearing from the Times-Union?
Yeah, they called me and said my parents were found, I guess, I don't know, they didn't say how or anything.
When was the last time you said you came down to saw your parents?
About 3 weeks ago. It was on a weekend. I can't give you a date. I have to figure it out. I'm not really sure.
Okay, but about 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Okay, and the email, what's going on with your email? You said you emailed him today, but you didn't get a response?
Yeah, I emailed him this afternoon. My dad at work.
Okay.
About college loan stuff.
About what?
College loan stuff.
About college loans?
Yeah.
All right. Let me just, so you will be here probably, you're going to go right to Albany Med?
I don't know. I don't even know where my mom is, but...
Yeah, she is at Albany Med.
Okay. Do you know her condition?
No, because I haven't talked to her. Let me give you my pager number.
You may be thinking, why did this phone call sound so strange? Why did they ask Christopher where he was? Well, that's simply because when detectives got to talk to Joan at the crime scene, they asked on a hunch, thinking that this was possibly a personal attack, if a family member had done this to her. She then nodded, yes. She was asked if it was her oldest son, Jonathan, and she nodded no. When asked if it was Christopher, she nodded yes. The detective said again, Christopher did this to you? And again she nodded yes. Did their son really attack them with an axe? How did he do this if he was 3 hours away at college? And why? From this call at the police department, it wasn't hard to believe because he was so calm and collected. He seemed detached from the situation, like he wasn't emotional at all. Although people can have different trauma responses, it seemed very unlikely that he could be this passive, but while being completely innocent and not ever hearing this news prior. Unless, of course, he had gotten this phone call from the reporter and then collected himself before calling the police department. Yet, he went home that night to Delmar and played the good son role of a grieving son. He sat at the bedside of his mother who was in a coma, and then eventually he was taken to the police department to be questioned for 6 hours. His alibi was that he was asleep on the lounge of the fraternity house that he lived at college. And while trying to find a motive for Christopher to charge him with this murder to prove that he had any involvement, detectives then received a tip from someone who believed they knew what happened to Peter. This actually had nothing to do with Christopher. They said that there was a custody case that Peter was in charge of that ended with someone very unhappy who threatened him. Now, the man was looked into as a possible suspect, but he had a solid alibi and was released. Another theory had to do with Peter's uncle, who was named Frank, and he also went by the fireman. He was thought to be involved in the mob, and detectives feared that possibly Frank was in trouble and was threatened after he talked to authorities about something that happened with the mob, and the mob found out, and they planned this hit on Frank's family involving Peter and Joan. There was the link of, the murder weapon being a fireman's axe and Frank being called the fireman. This was thought maybe it was supposed to send a message to Frank. Sounds plausible, right? Well, other than the fact that Frank at this time was in jail for refusing to talk to detectives, so it seemed unlikely that he would have been in trouble with the mob for talking to them if he was currently in jail for not doing so. Really, the only suspect they had at this point was Christopher. Being in college and at the campus put a damper in this entire investigation. Until that is, they talked to Christopher's frat brothers. These are the boys that he lived with. The boys said that they were home that whole night and they were up until about 3 a.m. and Christopher wasn't there at all. Yet, the phone call made the next morning was made from that college, and students saw Christopher out running on campus. At this point, Christopher was now allowed to go back to see his mother in the hospital and be at her bedside. The family pastor was also at Joan's bedside, and he said to detectives that Christopher really seemed to show zero grief at all. At this point, they needed to prove that Christopher had left campus that night, so they turned to surveillance footage. And thankfully, that's when they found it. Christopher's bright yellow Jeep leaving campus around 10:30 p.m. the night before Joan and Peter were murdered, or Peter was and Joan was brutally attacked. Now, from there, a yellow Jeep was also seen receiving toll tickets getting on and off the highways all the way up to Delmar, New York. It was believed that Christopher knew where the spare key was under a pod outside the home. He used that to get in, and then he disabled the alarm system around 2:14 a.m. Then, thinking detectives would be able to realize that somebody used the alarm code and knew the family, he then destroyed it with the axe. However, this information is actually stored downstairs in the box, not on the actual alarm system itself, so it was able to be found. It was believed that he then went upstairs and attacked his parents, wanting to mutilate their faces. Before leaving, he then staged the house to look like it was some sort of break-in or robbery. He cut the window screen and the phone lines, and by 8:30 a.m. the next morning, his Jeep was seen returning to campus. The only problem was the license plate on the Jeep couldn't be seen to confirm it was his Jeep, but there was a mud stain on the footage that you could see on the Jeep, and detectives had already confiscated his Jeep from him and confirmed there was the same mud stain. Everything was falling into place until Christopher said that he did leave campus that night, but only to park in a different space, and then he went back to the home. But if this was true, then why did a neighbor of the Porcos come forward saying that he had seen a bright yellow Jeep in their driveway that night around 4 a.m. This was a man named Marshall Gorky, and he said he didn't think much of it because he knew the Porco's son had a yellow Jeep that came around so often, so he figured the son was just coming to visit. Detectives were now certain that Christopher was the killer and charged him with murder. The only problem was they still didn't have a motive on why he would want to kill his parents, until they began to look deeper into his life. You see, while in college, Christopher was constantly telling people he was from a wealthy family who had multiple homes and fancy belongings and an unlimited amount of money. But this was not true. The Porcos were not poor by any means, but they were definitely not rich either. And he kept his family life extremely private and away from his friends to keep up with this lie. But you can only lie for so much, especially about finances, when you don't have the money to keep up with that lie. Meanwhile, Peter and Joan were dealing with the fact that he had a desire for expensive things, and he ended up taking out a loan that his parents thought was for school, and yet he used it to buy his new yellow Jeep. This wouldn't have really mattered to Joan and Peter. I mean, it's his money. He can spend it and get a loan for whatever he wants, except for the fact that he was using their names on the loan as co-signers. Christopher was then failing his classes at the university, and the university suspended him. This was the fall semester of 2003, and he was forced to withdraw from the actual college. He ended up going to Hudson Valley Community College, but didn't even finish the semester there. Yet somehow the next year he was back at the university he was at prior. He told his parents this was because a professor had misplaced a final exam that he had taken, and this caused his grades to go up, and because it was their mistake, they were paying for the tuition for that semester. The truth was, Christopher had gotten another loan out for $31,000 and forged Peter's signature as the co-signer once again. This is when Christopher's lies began to crumble beneath them. You see, less than 2 weeks prior to the murder, Peter found out about the school loan. He was furious, writing to Christopher that he was going to call the bank the next day and ask to not be on the loans. When he did so, he was also informed that he had co-signed for the Jeep as well, and since Christopher wasn't answering anyone's phone calls, Peter then wrote him an email saying, "I want you to know that if you abuse my credit again, I will be forced to file forgery affidavits in order to disclaim liability, and that applies to the Citibank college loan if you attempt to reactivate it or use my credit to obtain any other loan." He then went on to say that Christopher was welcome back into the family home to resolve this matter and that they were disappointed, but they still loved him and cared about his future. And then there was an email from his mother, Joan, asking Christopher about his mental state and that his father was going to have a nervous breakdown if he continued doing things like this. It would only be a week after these emails were sent that this couple would be attacked in their own home. It was also found that Christopher was making money off of eBay, selling cameras and computers. However, he wouldn't ever really send out the items that people were paying for once they already paid him. Items that were pictured looked a lot like the items that were stolen from his family and from his roommates. They all suspected him but didn't confront him at the time, and when these customers that he was scamming on eBay began to reach out saying, "Where is my item?" he would say that he was then his brother Jonathan and that Christopher had died and he, as Jonathan, had no idea where the items were. Investigators now believed they had a motive. His parents' life insurance policy was over $1 million. Throughout this time, his actual older brother Jonathan was trying to reach out to him by calling him. Jonathan did so over 40 times and Christopher never answered or called back. And Jonathan was actually a naval officer at this time in South Carolina and had really no idea what was going on with him, except for the fact that they had a joint eBay account. So Jonathan could see what Christopher was doing, and it made him look bad because he was claiming to be Jonathan. While awaiting trial after a month in jail, Christopher was then released on bail. He went to live with a coworker that he had worked at the veterinary clinic, who claimed that there was no way that Christopher could have done this because he was gentle with animals. In some sort of miracle, Joan Porco survived and came out of a coma. Detectives knew that this could mean everything to the investigation. They were so excited because then they got to question her more and they could officially, have no doubt about the fact that they had a confession from the actual victim saying that her son had attacked them. However, when they went to talk to her, Joan said she had no memory of the attack whatsoever, and then she also said there was no way her son Christopher could be involved. Christopher and Joan then moved in together into the home where the attacks had occurred and where their husband and father had been murdered. The trial then began 2 years later on July 27, 2006, and Christopher and Joan even walked to the courtroom every day together. They were like two peas in a pod, and Joan truly believed Christopher didn't do it. The defense then claimed that there was no forensic evidence linking him to the crime. No fingerprints were found on the axe, no blood was found on his clothes or his vehicle, and there was also a fingerprint found on the phone line where the phone lines had been cut, and this didn't match Christopher. However, the prosecution brought in his fraternity brothers who were all testifying saying he wasn't there that night. They also brought in toll booth workers who said that they saw the Jeep driving through the highway to stop and get the tickets, and the paramedics also testified who had watched Joan answer those questions the day she was attacked. His own brother, Jonathan, said that Christopher was one of the only people who knew the alarm code and that their relationship had always been very strained. Christopher was said to have a history of antisocial behavior, and a coworker of Peter's then came forward saying that Peter often described his son Christopher as a sociopath. It was also brought forward that Christopher had been trained from the veterinary clinic how to clean up after surgery, meaning he knew how to clean up blood and make sure there wasn't any left. But his mother Joan was still pushing for him to be released and found innocent. She even wrote a letter to the Albany Times-Union asking them to leave him alone and search for Peter's real killer or killers so that he could rest in peace and she could live in safety. But many believed instead of striving for safety, she was actually living with the monster instead. There were also statements made at trial surrounding the fact that many believed that Joan couldn't have been communicating with the paramedics with that much head trauma and that she would have been in too much shock to do anything. Yet her husband was in even more of a shock and had even more trauma to him and was able to complete his entire morning routine. On August 10th, the jury began deliberation, and within the day they returned with the verdict. Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder of his own parents. And a few months later, he was sentenced to 50 years to life on each count at Clinton Correctional Facility. And the judge said, "I fear very much what happened in the early morning hours of November 15th is something that could happen again." Christopher showed no emotion during this trial. He only wanted the jury to look at the whole picture to see that things didn't add up. He appealed his sentence. These were all rejected, and the jury told Joan that the verdict had nothing to do with her statement on the day of the attack, whether she meant what she said or not, whether she knew what she was saying. It was all the other evidence that determined their decision, and so this was to make Joan feel better about the fact that she could have implicated her son in her husband's murder. But Joan still believes that Christopher is innocent and visits him in prison and calls him all the time. In 2013, Lifetime actually released a movie called Romeo Killer: The Christopher Porco Story, which Christopher actually tried to stop from airing. This didn't work and the case was dismissed, but from what I can tell, this movie is quite fictionalized with just some facts of the Christopher Porco case kind of mixed in there. But from what I've seen about this case, people are either one side or the other when talking about it. He's either completely innocent or completely guilty. There's no in between on people's opinions about it. And I think that separation comes from the fact that it was a son who killed his parents or tried to kill both of his parents. Because there are those who know that it's possible for a child, a son, to do that to his parents, and there are those who do not want to believe it. I mean, we know on this channel, we have seen time and time again that blood relation does not keep monsters from going after their own family, and oftentimes it starts with them, and it escalates from there if they're not caught, or sometimes they will torture their family, not actually kill them, and then go on to kill. But that doesn't mean that the family doesn't fear and didn't fear when they were living with them what they would do next. So that's why it breaks my heart so much that Joan woke up with no memory, because of course you wake up and everyone is telling you that your son tried to kill you, and yet he's by your side and he's saying all these nice things, and so you're going to say that's not possible. This is my son, especially because a sociopath is very manipulative and can make you think exactly the way he wants you to think. I do wonder if Peter was very much aware of his son's tendencies and wasn't surprised by this attack at all. Part of him had always known that his son was capable of this, but I think Joan, on the other hand, didn't want to believe that her son was like this or could do anything like this until she was faced with it head on, and she was the victim. I mean, Peter told his coworker in fear that Christopher was what he believed to be a sociopath, and he didn't know how else to deal with it. So he began telling people, and then Joan finally admitted to the paramedics her worst fear that she had never wanted to admit before. The fact that her son had done this. I think that this was both of their last-ditch efforts for help, for justice. But I believe when she woke up not remembering anything and heard what she said, that she implicated her son in a murder, she began to panic. Because a mother loves her son, and up until she was attacked by him, she didn't want to believe it. So now that the only memory that she had proving that Christopher could do this, was capable of this, was gone, of course Christopher was back to being innocent in her mind. I don't think that Christopher would have harmed her again if he was found innocent and stayed in their home, but you know what? I don't even know about that, because he made killing his parents his job, and he had no remorse about that. He was going to get that insurance policy from them, so no, I take that back. I think that he would have taken her life and not even cared that it would have proved that he took his father's as well, because he was so dead set on money, and killing to him, it wasn't a big deal. It didn't matter. the possibility of his mother having to be put through this twice if he would have been, released and attacked her again. I'm so happy that he was found guilty. And this is just such an incredibly crazy, heartbreaking case that do you think that Christopher is guilty? Because there is still a lot of people who say he's innocent. And the main question I have for you is, do you think that Joan knew what she was saying before she went to the hospital? Do you think that she was just mindlessly answering questions, or do you think she had her wits about her enough to say, no, it was not Jonathan, yes, it was Christopher? But I'd love to hear what you think about that. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.